where decisions need to be made and there's a time crunch, I can prioritize what is the most important and think efficiently that way. It's when the pressure's off that I think I don't have that ability. It's like it's something that just clicks into place when we're on site. And I mean, look, like we can, we'll talk a little bit about our first year at C2E2, which was, I don't want to say a disaster because it was very successful. But I think you and I both went through the ringer there and didn't know what hit us and didn't know how to make those decisions in a timely manner. And you learn from doing it. There's a myth that Jimi Hendrix picked up a guitar and started shredding all along the Watchtower, like you get good at these things by doing them. And iron sharpens iron kind of a thing. I had to go through like really tough situations to learn how to deal with those situations the next time they'd come around.
Well, it's interesting because you talk about being better under pressure, but also hating pressure. It's such an interesting dichotomy, right? Because to your point, iron sharpens iron, but if you're better under pressure and you hate it, in my head, and maybe this is because we're men of a certain age and we think a lot alike, I can only attribute it because I feel the same way, especially when we're on site. When we're on site and I have a decision to make on site, it's easier for me because of the pressure. But I wonder if all of that comes from some kind of self-loathing.
Oh, 100%. Like, and oh my God. Oh, like unequivocally, it comes from self-loathing.
And for the listeners who think that I'm just attacking Chris unduly here, no, I'm talking very much about myself, and I know that it can apply to Chris as well because we know each other well enough. But I feel like it's almost as if there's a level of craving that you get for the pain. You know what I mean? The pain of making that decision because you excel in that situation.
Yeah, I don't want to talk. I mean, I guess we're here to talk a little bit about how the sausage is made, but there's something that tickles me about creative problem solving, and it's like to refer back to a movie. It's like that scene in Apollo 13 where they dump all the stuff on the table and they're like, "Here's what we've got to solve the problem with." And being on site is so very much that. It's like, oh, these people don't know where this thing is in the building. Well, I guess we've got to, get a bunch of 11 by 17 paper and jerry rig some signs. Or
it is a 5-day long episode of MacGyver.
Yes, very much. And you and I have done some real MacGyver-y stuff together in our time here. And that is also the best, like, we work in an office most of the time when, the people who make your conventions are sitting at computers like anybody else, talking to people on the phone. But when you're on site, there's this different sense of teamwork that comes with it. And this different sense of unified problem solving, that to what we were talking about earlier about, working under pressure, that like, I guess my brain operates that way a little bit better. It's like, okay, well, we've got 10 people and we've got 13 things to do. How do we split the people up? What are the most important? What can wait till later? Who can multitask, et cetera, et cetera. That, I guess if you talk to anybody who does live events, they think at least the good ones, they think that way. Loathe that I call myself good at what I do on a podcast about being good at what you do, but
that's classic Chris Delando, folks. Mm-hmm. I think I want to start kind of digging into what it's like to put on a show like this. Again, at the beginning, give a little bit of history here. Chris and I started with the company within a month of each other in 2018, having crossed paths a couple of times in the comic industry where we both kind of cut our teeth, for lack of a better term. And because we kind of entered at the same time and just happened to be working on the same show, C2E2 in Chicago, Our learning curves were very, very similar in nature. Chris, why don't you start? Talk about what it was like jumping into running a convention the size of C2E2, and our first real foray into that world being New York Comic Con. Because we were both in the same boat there. We started out, and the first show that we ran on site or helped run on site was New York Comic Con. Talk about the realizations that you kind of had about the business we were in as we were leading up to our first show.
To C2E2 or to New York Comic Con?
To C2E2, but through the learning process, going through New York Comic Con on site and that sort of thing, and what sort of realizations you had about the business that maybe you assumed some things and then realized that maybe they weren't exactly what you expected.
I don't know if it's maybe something that I didn't. Okay, let's put it this way. I will never enjoy conventions ever again. And conventions are always, and it's, you have to, I want to elaborate on that a little bit. Like, I'll never enjoy conventions in the way that I did before, which is to say that I got into this job because I loved conventions and I loved going to them, and I loved being there. I loved the experience of walking on the show floor and that sense of discovery. And I no longer have that. I see through the facade of the shows that I don't make, and I'm too wrapped up in the shows that I do to enjoy it in that same way. But through that, I've grown a new appreciation and a new love of them, which is, like the catharsis of seeing something that you worked so hard to create, that you made something of this scale real. And to say that I don't enjoy them anymore is just because I know how the sausage is made. Like, Gabe, you and I used to work at comic publishers before we got here. Like, that hampers your enjoyment of comics, no matter which way you swing it. Like, you take that shit home with you. And it makes it difficult to enjoy the medium in the way that that you did before. And as somebody who always wanted to work in the entertainment industry but had no marketable entertainment skills, like, I can't write, I can't act, I can't draw. So, like, I decided long ago that I was going to be a behind the scenes person. Like, that was going to be my lot in life. What we do now and how we build those shows is a sense of fulfillment that I didn't think I would ever experience in my life, and it's fantastic. And man, does it fucking suck that we can't have it right now.
Amen. And we'll get into talking about COVID and where we've gone as a result of COVID, and where we think we're going to come out, all of that stuff. But I want to keep on a little bit with 2018 and C2E2 and talk a little bit about our on-site experience, because it, as you alluded to earlier, it wasn't great. I remember, and in juxtaposition, our third show together in 2020, we had a very similar interaction to this that went the exact opposite way. I remember early on, I believe it was Thursday before the show started, we happened to cross paths at some point, and we kind of looked at each other and went, "You good?" And the answer was not positive. I want to kind of discuss how the failures, and I use that word not lightly, I mean it very importantly here, how the failures of 2018 in putting a show on. And by the way, folks, I think a lot of people have a misconception about how many people it takes to run an event like this. There are 5 full-time people on a show the size of C2E2, which brings in anywhere from 90 to 100,000 people to the show over 3 days. 5 full-time employees dedicated to the show. And Chris and I were 2 of them. But I want to talk about the failures, because I think the failures, and this may not be as profound as I like to believe, but I think the failures our first time around are really what made us the most successful over time. Talk about failure in your own life especially with 2018 in mind and how it's made things easier as you go.
Well, like, nobody likes failing. Nobody's like, man, I love failing so that I can, that whole like the Michael Caine in Batman Begins of why do we fall, Bruce? Like, that shit is stupid. Like, nobody likes failing. Failing sucks. It's with the perspective of time that you can look back and be like, oh, that helped me to get better. You might not even realize it at the time when you're failing. I mean, I get you and I have the saying, and we have the saying at ReedPop. Was like, well, now we know, and it's that's kind of the mentality that I like to take with these things. But nobody likes failing. I would not say that we failed at C2E2 in 2018, but it's definitely a case of, to use a Gabe Yoakum-ism, of we didn't know what we didn't know. We didn't know we were supposed to do that little thing because nobody told us. We didn't know we were supposed to plan for X, Y, and Z. And all of those eventualities happened, and we dealt with them on site. And it was not a great feeling to be like, your phone is literally ringing so often and notifications are coming through so much that your phone is hot. Like, your phones are you have two phones and they're both red hot, like, in your pocket, because they're going off so much. And you just have to deal with problems, and you don't know how to fix it. And thankfully we had a team around us that helped us. But I look at where we grew to after those hiccups and mistakes, and kind of how we muscled our way through it and grew into be the better employees that we are today, and the better show producers. And, like, yeah, in 2018, I clapped you on the back and I was like, are you okay? And you looked like you got hit by like an anti-aircraft, missile. You looked shell-shocked. And then fast forward to 2 years later in 2020, we had that same conversation of like, you good? And you were like, yeah, you good? Yeah. Like, because we had it figured out. Like, we knew what we were doing.
It's wild because, you talk about that day, that Thursday before the show, and I say this with absolutely no hyperbole whatsoever. It was, and you've heard this before, it was the worst day of my life. The two phones thing, it just spot on. It's hilarious. Chris and I did not discuss any of this before we jumped on the podcast, for the record, but absolutely, it's, hot phones, one ringing after the other. Sometimes you're on two calls at one time on two separate phones, walking around the convention center and trying to put out fires all day, and every step
literal
of the way,
and figurative,
yes,
occasionally,
correct. And every step of the way, thinking to yourself, I am not cut out for this. I shouldn't have ever tried. This is ridiculous to think that I could have the ability to do something like this. And then, all of a sudden, by sheer force of will, 80,000 people are going to show up whether you like it or not. And so you either do it or you don't. Those people are coming. So you really don't have much of a choice. And yes, I think you don't know what you don't know it became my mantra from that time on, because I think there's some power in it. If you don't know, then you have no limits. So it can work a lot of different ways. How do you carry that lesson of 2018 through to 2019 and 2020? And as we're planning the next show, right? Making those right decisions ahead of the show next time, right? Because, I think we both got on site and realized, oh, so I should have done this weeks ago, and I totally forgot to do it, or I didn't even think that it was a thing to do. How did it inform the way you work moving forward?
I was definitely more cautious. I remember as we went into 2019, I was more I don't want to say I was more like inquisitive about how the